Hello everyone, and welcome to our monthly support coordinator webinar. My name is Vicky Gray, and on behalf of Endeavour Foundation, I'll be your host for today's webinar. During our session, we'll be diving into the NDIS Navigator recommendations, and we'll be hearing from Mary Ingerton from Support Coordination Academy. As we are meeting online with attendees logging on across all of Australia, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognise the importance of the lands we call home. If you would like to honour the custodians of where you're logging in from, please feel free to mention the traditional name in the chat. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gubbi Gubbi people, traditional custodians of the land on which I'm hosting from today. In the spirit of reconciliation, Endeavour Foundation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'd like to quickly go over some housekeeping before we proceed. Now, please note that your microphones and cameras are automatically off for the duration of the webinar. However, we encourage that you engage with other support coordinators about the topic within the chat. And for any questions you would like Mary to address, please include those in the Q&A. There will be a survey circulated at the end of the webinar, so if you would like to provide feedback on the session or suggest possible future topics. Also in the chat box, you'll find a link to our privacy policy. Please reach out if you have any questions regarding this. Now, before I introduce our speakers today, I strongly encourage everyone to subscribe to our bi-weekly Care Connect newsletter. It's an invaluable resource tailored specifically for support coordinators. This newsletter not only features our latest informative NDIS and support coordinator articles, but also highlights work and community opportunities for your clients. Plus, you'll stay updated in our latest home vacancies. So if you're looking to enhance your support efforts and stay informed, please take a moment to sign up using the link in the chat. Thanks. Now, as mentioned earlier, during this webinar, we're going to dive into the topic of demystifying the NDIS Navigator recommendations. Our presenter today is Mary Ingerton from Support Coordination Academy. So shortly, Mary will be covering what the NDIS Navigator changes entail, how these changes affect your role, and what to expect moving forward. However, before handing you over to Mary, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Shania Brennan. Shania is the Business Improvement Specialist here at Endeavour Foundation and leads a team of social workers and disability specialists advocating for our clients. With qualifications in psychology, HR management and social work, and 8 years in the community sector, Shania is passionate about empowering vulnerable people to have choice and control over their lives. Over to you, Shania.
Thank you, Vicky, and hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you all today. As Vicky just mentioned, I work at Endeavour Foundation and I lead some teams advocating for people with disabilities, both in the change of situation space and in the intake and inquiry space. So as you know, today we'll be unpacking the NDIS Navigator recommendations, and I'm here to talk about how these changes might be felt from a provider's lens. I'm going to particularly focus on how this change may impact our intake and inquiry space. So currently, we see some big gaps in support from the NDIS for people with a disability that are inquiring about accessing services. For Endeavour, we see the vast majority of our inquiries coming through from participants and their families who are feeling stuck or overwhelmed in navigating the NDIS because they don't yet have NDIS funding, but know they need support, or they have funding, but know they need some increased support and they're not sure how to navigate this. So while our team can and do provide support to these participants and their families, this often means that they aren't able to start accessing our services right away because of the barriers in funding. We know that there is a backlog of applications in the NDIS space, meaning that people can be waiting months to receive an outcome for their funding, and they're stuck not being able to access services until this comes through. The recommendations for the Navigator role will support us as a provider in ensuring that any person with a disability can receive support from the NDIS to access the services they need immediately while they wait for funding to come through, and they can transition across to our services if they choose. This means we'll see a positive impact in ensuring people that there is equality for any person with a disability to receive some level of support with the NDIS, whether that be in accessing foundational support or more individualised support. With participants and their families leading the majority of our inquiries for services, we often see that they also don't have allocated funding for support coordination at that point. So they're really trying to navigate the complex system that is the NDIS on their own. So another benefit that we might see from the Navigator role will mean that when we receive an inquiry, we will be able to connect those participants and their families with a local navigator straight away who can journey with them through the NDIS process as well. The introduction of foundational supports also might mean that any person with a disability can be supported by the Navigator to access capacity building and other supports that they are eligible for, whether they're eligible for the NDIS or not. My final quick point in relation to the recommendations for the is in relation to the different types of navigators. So the additional navigator offerings focusing on different areas of support is positive for people with a disability and ensuring they can receive specialised support, and allows a provider like Endeavour to support the participant and their family in connecting with an appropriate navigator. So acknowledging that this is a big change that has been recommended, we can see lots of benefits, but it also is a really, really big change. And it will ensure equality for any person with a disability to access support through the NDIS. So I'm going to now hand over to Mary, who will take us through the rest of today's discussion. Thank you, Mary.
Hi everyone, and thank you for coming along to the webinar. We've got quite a lot of people who have registered for the webinar, so that clearly shows that people are really interested in the topic. Look, I'm going to really talk to you around demystifying the NDIS recommendations around navigators. I suppose what I really wanted to acknowledge is that this webinar is quite different to our normal webinars that are really focused on professional development, but it's really addressing the broader issues that I'm seeing on a daily basis from support coordinators, just concerns around the information that's out there or that's not out there in relation to the recommendations around the Navigator role. So I based my presentation on all of the questions that you've submitted. One of those questions really stood out for me, and it was, are you just speculating or do you know what is happening? Look, this is a very valid concern. The truth is that much of what we're hearing about the changes is speculation around what the future is going to look like, because it's still uncertain. So the insights I'll share with you today are grounded in research and information that's available within the public space around the NDIS review and recommendations. So hopefully I'll be able to provide some clarity, especially around the questions that I'm getting on a regular basis, and try and dispel some of that confusion or misinformation that's out there in the social domain. Okay, so let's dive in and have a look. I'm going to try and allow as much time as possible for questions at the end, so please make sure you chuck those questions into the chat. There's no wrong questions, there's no silly questions. It's really coming from your own experience and your own knowledge, and it's something that you really want to understand. So I might answer them through the presentation, but also we're going to have time at the end to address any questions as well. And I think while you're going through and listening to the presentation, it would be really good for you to highlight or put questions in there or statements in there that other support coordinators can share, because quite often we might be feeling quite isolated and feeling like we're only asking these questions, but there's actually often other people who are thinking the same thing. So if you have any specific concerns around the Navigator roles? Can you chuck them into the chat so that we can discuss them around the end? Okay, let's have a look. First of all, we're going to have a look at timeframes. Timeframes were one of the biggest questions that I got when people were registering for the session. Okay, so the NDIS review identified the need for an ecosystem of foundational supports that existed for all people with disability. So this was the original intent of the NDIS. The original intent of the scheme was to have an ecosystem of supports that every person with a disability could access, and then people with really high and complex support needs who have significant impact in relation to the impairment of their impairment or disability could get additional individualised funding to support them to access community, have inclusion, all of those things. So that was the original intent of the scheme. Foundational supports will sit outside the NDIS so everybody can access them, and they will complement the supports already available within community and mainstream services. So Navigator services were a recommended support for all people with a disability as part of the foundational supports. So the review published its finding in November 2023, and the recommendations were accepted in principle by the government. So the NDIS review recommended a 5-year time frame to design, develop, trial and transition into the new way of doing things. So we are just about up to year 1. We're already starting to see a lot of consultation happening, a lot of information coming out. So we're already starting that consultation process to really understand what the design needs to look like. So most of you would have seen or hopefully seen that a disability reform roadmap for 2024-2025 was published. So the roadmap really talked about the NDIS review recommendations are being considered by disability ministers across state and territories, and a formal response is due in December 2024. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. Hopefully that will give us a bit more clarity around what the intention is or what the ideas are so far. What is the information that they've gathered? What is the intention of their governments going forward? So the Department of Social Services have already engaged the social deck to facilitate consultation around foundational supports, starting only with general supports. And we'll talk a bit more about what general supports are. So general supports that they're discussing at the moment doesn't include Navigator Roles at this stage. So the consultation will continue through to the end of November. So getting on the DSS engage.dss.gov.au website, we can include that within the information that we send out. Getting on that website, there's face-to-face consultation, there's online consultation. So state and territories are working with the government to develop a foundational supports strategy. The aim is to have a phased-in rollout approach starting in July 2025, right through to July 2026. So if you think about the consultation that's happening now, this is just one level, just general supports. It's really starting with the peer supports, all those kind of supports now, and then they'll start moving through the different levels of foundational supports. So in the meantime, there needs to be lots and lots of consultation, lots of design, testing, and before any rollout or implementation can start to happen, any transition that needs to happen. Okay. So let's have a look at the type of foundational supports. So there were 2 types of foundational supports that they recommended. So one was general supports and targeted supports. And Navigator Roles fitted into both of these categories. So general supports are available for all people with disability, including their families and carers. So there are things like information and guidance about their rights and accessing services. So this could be online information, they could be advocacy services, they could be peer support groups, they could be online tools and links to social networks. There's also a lot more focus around, there was a lot more acknowledgement that community organisations and mainstream services, that there were barriers to people with disability accessing and being included within those services, and that they didn't really understand the NDIS or how it works. And as a support coordinator, you will come across that on a daily basis. So you're constantly getting providers going, well, how does this work and how does this work? And especially if you're dealing with a mainstream service, they constantly have an unrealistic expectation about what our role is. So there's also funding as part of the foundational supports. It was acknowledged that there need to be funding to build capacity within the broader community and mainstream services to be more inclusive and accessible for all people with disability. And a much better understanding about where the differences are and what services, and a much better understanding about people, or the inclusiveness for people with disability. General supports will also include information linkages and capacity building grant funding, or ILC funding. So most of you would have heard about what that is before. There's actually more funding coming in at the moment. So the aim of that funding is to improve and expand on the kind of activities that were developed under the ILC program. So prior to the review recommendations coming out, there was ILC funding that was put out into the sector, and it's around capacity building. So it might have a specific focus around knowledge or skill development or qualities or safeguarding or whatever that might be. But it often had a specific focus. But the challenges with that funding is that they were often pilots. So they get up and running and can be quite effective within the community, but then the funding runs out. So it's really going back and looking at what was really effective, what are some additional programs that we need to continue that funding with, but also what are the other gaps within communities. So they are general supports, yeah? So targeted supports are for people with disability under the age of 65 who have additional support needs and are not accessing or eligible for the NDIS. Now, I'm not talking about Navigator Roles, I'm just talking about general and targeted supports in general. So these supports are really matched to a person's level of need. So they're things like that are already available within society, but it's about funding more of them or funding additional supports, more early intervention focus as well. So things like home and community supports, so support to go shopping, cleaning, maintaining their home, aids and equipment. Supports for adults with psychosocial disability to build their capacity, independence and daily living skills. So that could be an early intervention focus. It could be supports for families and children with emerging developmental concerns. So there are a lot more children coming into the early childhood, early intervention services because there aren't those services out there, or there's such a long waiting list to get into those services or those child health services. So it's about building the capacity within the community to meet that need. And then also looking at transitioning supports for young people to help them prepare for employment and independent living. So they're the general and foundational, or general and targeted. So at the moment, the consultation's just around general supports. To my understanding, there's no discussions around navigators at the moment. I think we'll hear a lot more about what the intent is and what's happening next, with the formal response in December. Okay, let's have a look at Navigator Roles. So again, responding to the questions that I had when you registered. So the recommendation around the foundational supports is around a connected ecosystem of supports. But what they also acknowledged is that there's so many different roles to support people to navigate other supports, or supports within health or justice or education or support coordinators, LACs, that becomes very, very, very confusing for participants about who's supposed to be doing what. So it's about streamlining that process and everybody focusing on having a role or a service that goes straight across the board for all people with disability, whether they have access to the NDIS or not, that can support them to access these foundational supports, mainstream and individualised funding through the NDIS if they have access to the scheme. Okay. Okay, so the recommendation is for different kinds of navigators to ensure there are options available based on a person's unique situation and your assessed level of need for support. So some of the things that really shone out for me in relation to the Navigator Roles, and these were quite a few questions that people had. The recommendation in general, the structure or the model of what navigators would look like, that they need to be based locally and have strong local community connection and knowledge. They need to be an independent service provider, so not a provider who is providing other supports as well. They need to have a person-centered focus and directed by people with disability, not the NDIS. They need to be available for all people with disability as well as those eligible for the NDIS. The positions need to be funded outside a participant's plan. So at the moment, support coordination is funded within a participant's plan. Not everybody gets access to that level of support. We know that if people don't get a support coordinator, they're supposed to get access to an LAC. We know how overwhelmed and huge caseloads that LACs have, and the intent of their role has really blown out. They just don't have capacity. So the intent is that everybody would get access to a navigator if they so choose to access that support, and it would be funded outside a participant's plan. Okay. The other thing, one of the things that also people have been raising questions about is like how would that be funded? Would there be sole traders? Because there's sole traders, there's organisations, there's small business, there's large business. Like, how would that work? So one thing that they were really, really clear about, and I think the minister has been really, really clear about, is that they want to retain a really quality professional workforce. There's a lot of information coming out around fraudulent providers, but they've also been very, very clear around wanting to retain those quality providers. And some of you would have already seen the announcement of a quality supports program pilot that they want to run for 12 months. So that for support coordination and SIL providers. So that to me is an indicator that funding outside the NDIS, they can do that now with the changes in the legislation. And it also might be a way to actually have a look at how they can develop different models of how they can support that workforce, because they want to retain the workforce. The workforce will need to increase, not decrease. Okay, all providers will need to be registered. We already knew that. Well, we knew from the recommendations from the review, and we're already starting to see that there's progress and work being done around the NDIS having transparency and accountability around who's accessing NDIS funds. The other thing that they really talked about was there is an absolute need to develop practice guidelines, which would be incredible, for people to have access to specialised training, and that people will need to have the right skills and experience to be able to offer different services. Okay, so as we go through the different roles, you'll kind of get a bit of an indication about what they're talking about. Okay, so I would think most of you would have seen this diagram. If you've read the NDIS review recommendations or had a look at the summary or the analysis, you would have seen this picture somewhere. I've seen it used quite a few times. To me, it really helps to kind of get an understanding of that, that breadth of navigators across the role. Okay, so the idea of where navigators fit in is that for all people with disability. So you might have someone who's just got an acquired disability. They might contact a service that has navigators for general assistance to say, hey, I just need some information at this point in time. This has happened. I'm a bit overwhelmed. I just need some information. Can you just put me in the right direction? Yeah. So that will be general assistance to people with disability and their families. So thinking about it on a spectrum, those who need just some general assistance, a light touch, those through to who need very specialist, intensive level of support. So these general assistance, the people who are providing that general for all people with disability would also support a person if they wanted to apply for access to the NDIS. So the aim is that there would be locally funded specialists to do functional assessments to support someone's access application to the scheme. And then once they were approved, that there would be a holistic needs assessment to determine their disability-related needs, flexible, individualised whole of person budgets, and intensity of support navigator, a level of navigator required. So that's kind of when navigators fit in. Okay, So if you keep moving to the right, where it's got participants, that's when someone is entering the NDIS. So you can also see they've kind of got self-service, general support, additional support, specialist navigator. And down the bottom, you've actually got recommendations for caseloads and the amount of hours that would be funded per person. Okay, so self-service would be, again, pretty much that LAC. Probably in the future, the recommendation was also in the future for plan managers to be phased out, and that the whole payment system around invoicing and when people are self-managing and all that kind of thing to be more electronic and more streamlined and more efficient for people. So if you think who would really do this self-service or this general support, I'm thinking that would probably be LACs, or plan managers or people with limited skills wanting to move into that more information sharing, limited level of support. Okay. So you're thinking you've got self-service for those who only want and need a minimum level of support. Could that self-service could be online stuff, it could be workshops, it could be programs, it could be some training, it could be some just information sessions, but really they've got about 1 hour per month is what they're estimating. The general support are for those who need a small amount of ongoing support. Really interesting that they're using that language, ongoing support. Not a language that the NDIS is using at the moment. So these are for people who, on average, would only need about 3 hours a month. So it could be people who may have had really, really complex needs. They've been on the scheme for a while and their supports are quite stabilised, and they're actually, and it's more on a monitoring, reviewing, checking in, but everything's pretty much running around quite smoothly. Or it could be someone who needs a general level of support, who has quite a strong informal network, quite a good resilient network of supports. So when you're thinking about people on your caseload, that could probably be someone who would fit general support. But again, this would be assessed through the assessment process. Then we get to additional support. So additional supports are pretty much where the support coordinator level 2 sits. For those needing a higher level of supports, so they're recommending a 1:24 ratio caseload and average 5 hours per month, which is more than what people get now. So basically what they're talking around and the skills that are required for this role, they need to have the skills to be able to facilitate person-centered planning, to assist a participant to determine their own goals and how they want to achieve their goals. Assistance in coordinating and connecting with foundational, community and mainstream supports, as well as utilising individualised NDIS funding to access tailored supports that address the functional impact of a person's impairment. So the NDIS funding will be reflective of that assessment and what the functional impact of their impairment is. An ability and understanding of how to develop action plans to clearly evidence and detail how a navigator is assisting a participant to access the supports they need, as well evidence outcomes achieved. An ability to build strong community connections through collaborative working relationships with mainstream services, community organisations and foundational supports. Scheduling regular check-ins to review progress and support needs. Reporting on evidence-based outcomes. So you would need to have really good systems, processes and structures in place to gather that evidence to be able to measure outcomes achieved. It's also talking about with that connection to community, having that ability to identify, like being really connected to communities, so connecting with community in forums and community groups and stuff like that, to have the ability to identify where the gaps and support needs are and being able to report that back, so a feedback loop. Also, where there are risks or issues identified, the navigator should have the tools, skills and experience to develop mitigation and clear mitigation strategies. But also this is really important, there also needs to be a clear escalation pathway to the NDIA where mitigation hasn't been effective. which is it's quite different to what the environment we're operating in now. Okay, let's have a look at specialist support navigator. So I'm going to try and hurry up a bit because I want to let you have as many questions as possible. Okay, so specialist navigator for those with more complex needs, looking at 1-to-2 ratios, around 10 hours a month. So they'll provide a more intensive, high level of support using complex case management frameworks. So they need practice frameworks to clarify the roles and accountabilities of NDIS staff, mainstream service staff, and specialist navigator roles. So it's more of a case management framework approach, more a collaborative approach. It's more for participants who are connected with multiple mainstream services where there's significant risks or highly complex disability-related support needs. Specialist navigators will need a higher level of skill, experience, and qualifications. There needs to be a coordinated and joint planning and funding focus across complex mainstream settings. So coordinated, joint planning, funding focus across justice, health, mental health, child protection interfaces. There needs to be a panel of decision makers, including specialist navigators and key mainstream agency workers and NDIA workers to ensure there's a coordinated, collaborative approach to supporting people with complex needs. Okay. There's also additional navigator offerings. Okay, I'll go through this pretty quickly. So what they recognise is that there's some specialist offerings that need to be developed. So these are around housing and living. So all of these offerings will sit within the general and specialist streams. So if you think of those additional and specialist streams, that's where they will sit. Okay, so housing and living. So these are all in relation to people who have access to the scheme. Oh, some of them are outside the scheme as well. So housing and living. They will require a strong understanding of best practice and innovative approaches to housing and living. This is to ensure that participants have choice and control over how and where they want to live and have a greater opportunity to be part of their community. This also includes ensuring the provider of houses, SDA, is separate to the provider of support within the home. So the SIL provider is separate to the SDA provider. That's one of their recommendations. Psychosocial recovery coaching will support people with psychosocial disabilities, including those with high and complex support needs. They will provide a recovery enabling and coordinated support model. They require expertise in mental health to build capacity of young people and adults. It's recommended that new practice standards are developed specifically for this role around the skills, experience and expertise required to support people with severe and complex mental health conditions, and that there's a co-funded and co-commissioned initiative between the NDIS, public health and mental health systems to support this navigator service. Lead practitioners. So lead practitioners will be key workers with support to support children and families through an early intervention approach. Lead practitioners will have a family-centred and empowerment focus to build a supportive team around the family and children. The aim is to provide a transdisciplinary approach with a breadth of disciplines to support the lead practitioner. This is to reduce the fragmentation that happens when everyone's kind of in silos doing their own things. It includes navigating the education and other mainstream systems to ensure there's, again, collaborative, joint planning, joint funded approach. Needs to include a range of methods to support families. There needs to be a lot more sharing of information and resources across like a communities of practice network. Really, really interesting. So to me, they are very strong, person-centered, strengths-based recommendations. To me, they make a lot of sense. Okay. Let's have a look. Keep going. Keep me mindful of the time. So what to expect going forward? So what I'm hearing from support coordinators all the time is that they're feeling very disempowered, disrespected, fatigued. Yeah, I've talked to a number of support coordinators saying, I don't know if I can do this anymore. There's so much change going on. There's so much uncertainty. I'm not quite sure what's happening. I've talked to a lot of support coordinators who have said to me, hey, I'm hearing that support coordination is going to be phased out. You know, I've set up my own business. What am I going to do? So what I'm telling you is a support coordination as a service may transition into a navigator service, but the skills and experience that you have is going to be invaluable. Yeah, keep that in mind. There's also opportunity for you to start thinking about how can you have some control and influence. Yeah, so start to think about professional development. Now is the time to start think about where do you want to position yourself? What are the skills and experience that you will need in the future? Is there some kind of specialization that you want to focus on? Is it general supports? Is it specialized supports? Is it additional supports? Where is your skills and experience? Where are the gaps in your skills and experience? And where can you go and increase those skills and experience so that you are ready for this transition when and if it happens? Start to make a plan of how to attain these skills and experience. Access training, find a mentor, apply for roles that will help you develop these skills. Stay informed. I'm assuming you would all know about National Disability Services, or NDIS, who are the peak body for disability providers nationwide. Sign up to get their emails, go and join them, subscribe to them. They have some amazing resources and they are constantly sending out information and keeping us up to date around what's happening within the sector. And lastly, own it. Question what you are hearing. There's a lot of disinformation out there, especially in social media forums. Make an effort to question what people are. So ask them. So where'd you get that information from? Ask them to substantiate what they are saying. So, but also make the time to do your own research and stay informed. Okay, that's me. At the moment, business as usual. So I'm going to finish up now and I'm going to have a look at the questions. Okay, so I'm just going to go across here. Okay, so I'm assuming I'm going to go into Q&A. Yeah, okay.
That's correct, Mary. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got a bit of time, hopefully about 15 minutes. Okay, so my employer will not be able to transition our SE roles to Navigator roles as they also deliver other services. Is that correct? The recommendations are for Navigator services to be independent. However, we also need to think about the reality and what that needs to look like. So at the moment, there is only a small percentage, maybe a third if you're lucky, of support coordination providers who are independent. So what does that mean for the workforce going forward? I think there needs to be a lot of negotiation. I think there needs to be a lot of consultation and brainstorming and thinking about what is that going to do to the workforce? What is that actually going to look like? So to me, I think there needs to be a lot more consultation and design around that. I think at the moment, it's really thinking about if you are working for an organisation that has support coordination services as well as other services, start to put your systems and structures and processes in place. Do you have an independent software for your support coordination service? How are you separating that service from all the other services? You should have an independent software. You should have a software that helps you with planning tools, action plans, risk assessments. You should have a software that keeps your information and the participants' information confidential. So you are managing that conflict of interest. Okay. Okay, if you work for an organisation that provides a group of services, you won't be able to just transition into the role. You will need to find a new job. I don't know, that's really up to you. I think it's really up to you. I think there needs to be more consultation and discussion around whether services need to be independent, or if they are, can independence be managed within the service? Are there criteria around that, or is it absolutely independent, as in a completely different service? But really, as individuals, we need to make choices about where we want to be. Yeah, what are the skill gaps? Where do we want to be in the future? We've got these skills and experience. Start planning now. Okay. I think we'll know a lot more by end of the year, early next year. I think we'll know a lot more about what the government's thinking. So if the system is designed to support clients who has run out of funding and don't have SC funding, how is it that they are limited to hours per month depending on complexity? Sorry, I don't quite understand that question. The aim of the Navigator role is to be funded outside the NDIS. So their funding would be included on the participant's plan, which is a major issue at the moment because we are working with participants with really, really high complex needs, having to manage a lot of risk. And there's not there's no clear, efficient pathway for us to actually get those additional supports for the participant that they need. So the aim is to have them outside the NDIS and to really, it would be more about funding a service upfront as opposed to in arrears. That's my understanding. So we have to finish up our SC business to work for DSS. No, not at all. Department of Social Services is just the department, the government department that has taken on board the consultation for the foundational supports. There's no need to work for DSS at all. There will still be independents. There will still be larger organisations, smaller organisations. Remember, coming back to there is a workforce that they're going to need. There needs to be design and discussions around that, around how do we maintain that quality workforce? What are the different models and how can we fund them? Who pays the Navigator for the hours of work they are doing that cannot be charged to the NDIS funding? Okay, so again, funded outside the plan, nothing to do with the plan. It's around assessing when a person first comes in or goes through a reassessment around what is the level of need that they need to be able to navigate, access, be included within community. Yeah, what level of navigator do they need, and what kind of specialist navigator do they need? Do they need someone with home and living? Do they need someone with a psychosocial experience and skills? So really thinking about funded outside the plan, no longer restricted by within the plan. A lot of commentary and chat about the information from slide 10. It was very beneficial. Where can we find out more? Sorry. Slide 12. Okay. Okay. Slide 12 is within the, if you go, there's actually an NDIS review report, which is massive, really, really hard to read, but there's also like a synopsis. There's a supplementary one that provides a lot more detail, provides examples, case studies, so they'll go like, this is what it is now, and this is what it's going to look like in the future. So go and have a look at that. I'll provide some links to the Endeavour and they can send them out to you. But they're all on the NDIS review website. There's some great information in there. How are they planning on transitioning complex clients? I have high complex clients that I would struggle to hand over due to my experience with their care needs. How do I hand this over? Okay, so the intention is not to hand clients over. The intention is for you to be able to support them through this transition period. So basically, my understanding is there needs to be a lot of design and planning around basically working with the clients that you're working with, transitioning them through to a navigator service as opposed to a support coordinator service. So if you're a specialist support coordinator, working as a specialist navigator. If you're a level 2 support coordinator, working within that space. So it's thinking about, it's not about transitioning your clients anywhere. It's about supporting them to come with you along on the journey. Yeah? Okay. How can a navigator be person-centered with large caseloads? Yep, good point. Which is why all support coordinators should be doing person-centered planning, no matter how big your caseloads are. If you're not doing person-centered planning and you don't understand it, then you need to go and get training in it. So if you've got large caseloads, then you need to be really talking about how effective can you be with a massive caseload. So that's discussions that you would have with the organisations. But in relation to the navigator roles, they are recommending lower caseloads with more hours. Okay, who determines the level of support that participants fall into? Okay, again, as I talked about earlier, the intention is for foundational supports to get set up, that a needs assessment needs to get set up. So that's going to really re-inform that new planning process. So the planning process will be someone will get support to put their access application into the NDIS, and that would be from a general or that front-on navigator. They would help them with their application. If they don't have access to get, the recommendation is if they don't have access to get specialist reports, that the NDIS would fund that. They can go and get those supports. They'd put their application in. And then once they meet the criteria, then they would have a holistic needs assessment. So they're not talking about the previous individual assessments that we're talking about. They're talking about developing a holistic needs assessment. So someone going into the home, talking to the family, someone going to the school, someone going to someone's workplace, same person going to the workplace, meeting with other stakeholders, meeting with whenever, how many, whatever, gathering assessment. So more of a holistic approach to understand the functional impact of someone's impairment and recommending a level of funding for a person based on the functional impact of their person's impairment. So it's looking at more of a holistic focus as opposed to saying, well, this person has this disability, they obviously need these supports. Yeah. So it's more looking at a more holistic approach. Okay. How is this going to be applied for participants that have psychosocial disabilities and the cyclic nature of their mental health impact in their sports? Really, really good, really good point. There's a lot of recommendations around supporting people with psychosocial disability better, that there needs to be a lot of practice frameworks, that there needs to be clear assessment, pathways, more effective pathways where people can get their needs assessed when things change. So those assessments would then recommend, well, actually, so there needs to be a lot more design and planning around those transition points. So what happens when someone goes into crisis and they need another level of support or additional level of support? So this is the practice frameworks that the NDIS review were recommending, that there needs to be a lot more planning and practice frameworks and standards around transition points. How does one person get from A to B when their support needs change? How do they get additional support or less supports if they are more stabilized? So it's really about all of this needs to be worked out. But there's a lot more. The thing that I really, really like about the recommendations is focusing on training, practice frameworks, practice standards, transition points, really starting to get it right and really acknowledging that people with specific types of disability need specific focus of support. Will support coordinators become obsolete? I get this question every single day. Support coordinator as a role will no longer be called a support coordinator. It will be called a navigator. And that navigator will work within a specific level of complexity depending on where you want to work. Yeah, so there's going to be more choice. So the role, the name of the service might change, but the skills, the experience that you have is going to be incredibly valuable. Yeah. So there needs to be this, they talked a lot about, there needs to be a lot of design and discussion and consultation around how that transition is going to happen. And again, you know, we've still got 4 years to go. Okay. Is the intent to remove support coordination in place of navigators? If so, that will be a dangerous road. Okay, so hopefully I've kind of clarified a bit that it's not like support coordinators going and the navigator's going to come in and someone's going to get a less or a worse service. That's not the intention. The intention is to streamline a navigator service right across the board so every person with disability can have access to a navigator. Yeah. It also means that they're acknowledging that people with different levels of need get access to a navigator depending on their assessed level of need. So someone with really high complex needs would likely get someone with a specialist navigator. Someone with just highly complex need would likely get someone who's got the skills and experience of a support coordinator. Someone who needs a little bit of general assistance because they have a lot of capacity to do a lot of the stuff themselves, then they would just get a general level of support. So think about the skills, experience, level of support that everybody will get as opposed to replacing one with another. Okay? Will people use a navigator in the beginning and then transition to a support coordinator or replace it? Okay, hopefully I've answered that question. Will the foundation supports replace safe supported at home? I don't know, sir. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that safe and supported at home program. The intention is for foundational supports to be additional, not replace. Okay. So they're also looking at what's already working. There's already discussions around what's working within your community now. What are some really good programs that we could extend? And then what are some additional programs that we need? What are some additional supports and services that we need? Okay. So there's no official confirmed information from the agency, and given that today's insights are based on external and unverified discussions, how do you ensure the accuracy and reliability of information shared with us today? Look, I understand your cynicism. However, I understand that it's really quite stressful. But I suppose we need to really understand that there's only limited information out there at the moment. Take part in the consultations. There's all these consultations going on about foundational supports at the moment. Get involved. Be a part of it. Find out. Ask these questions. So all I can say is there's more and more happening all the time. Get involved. Be a part of it. Okay. Will mainstream organisation staff be suitably trained to help people with disabilities within 1 year timeframe for financial supports? I don't know about a 1 year timeframe. What they're talking about is at the moment in the roadmap, they're looking at a phased-in approach of general foundational supports at this stage from July next year. Yeah. So if you think about it, at the moment, we're doing consultation, they're starting to look at design, they'll start to look at development and funding a lot of those supports that are already out there. Are there additional supports that we need to build? What else do we need to do? When we talk about a phased-in approach, they'll start with what's the easiest. Additional funding here, prop up these supports here. These supports were already done before. Maybe we can put some more supports in place, building some online. So I think it's a phased-in approach. Yeah. Okay. So it's not about replacing. It's about thinking, what do we need to do? What's not working? This is what the consultation is all about. What's not working? How can we do this better? Can you confirm if Navigator Roles will not exist as organisations where other... Okay, I've already talked about that. Funding, how they will be funded is I think, the biggest question for everybody. It's a bigger question for me. All I can say is what the intent is, what the intent of the NDIS review recommendations are. Will small community not-for-profit organisations lose their funding to support coordination? Again, it's not the intention for all these skilled workers to lose all this workforce. The intention is to increase the skills and experience, ensure that people are providing professional and quality services. So again, start thinking about how can I position myself to take up these positions, to transition into these roles. Okay, we've got 53, so we've only got 7 minutes left. I answered just a couple or two. Okay. I think I've answered most of these. Okay, I think considering that there's a shift by government to have large organisations, the reality is that there are way more sole traders, independent organisations providing a support coordination service than there ever was before. That is a valuable workforce that the government are going to have to consider. Yeah. The other intention too is that for participants to have choice. So do they choose to go with a larger organisation, or do they choose to go with a more independent service? Okay. Okay, I think we've pretty much answered all the questions. There's only like 6 minutes to go, so I'm going to end up there. Happy for you to email me at any time at info@scacademy.com.au. If you want me to, if you want to book time to have a conversation, happy to do that, not a problem. Thank you everyone for coming today. I just want to say, hopefully I've clarified a few things for you. There's a lot of information out there, and please participate in the consultation process as much as possible. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was amazing. I can see that the chat absolutely went off and everyone has so many questions, and you managed to get through lots of them. So I think everyone can give a big hand to Mary for that one. I'm sure everybody who actually attended the webinar has also learned lots of new information today, so thank you. Tomorrow you will all receive an email including a recording of today's session, along with a transcript and a link for the survey. So again, we really appreciate hearing your feedback because it helps us to continue delivering insightful future webinars for you guys. So please keep an eye out for that in your inboxes. And lastly, I'd love to invite everyone here today to come along to our November webinar. This next webinar will cover building participant capacity, identifying and evaluating quality providers. This one will be held on Wednesday, the 20th of November, so about 5 weeks from now, at the same time of 12 p.m. 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. and that's Eastern Australian Standard Time. So obviously check the time in your location for daylight savings as well. Also, please note that November's webinar will be the last one for this year, but we will kick back off in February 2025. For those who missed it earlier, we just want to repost the subscription link in our comments box for those who want to enhance their support efforts and stay informed through our Care Connect newsletter. On behalf of Endeavour Foundation, I want to extend a warm thank you for everyone who attended today's webinar. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we hope to see you again next time. Thank you.
Hello everybody, welcome to our Learning and Lifestyle Hub. This is where we make learning fun.
Hi, my name is Andy. I love making Mexican. One day I'm going on MasterChef.
Hi, I'm Grace. I live independently with support when I need it. I live my life my way.
Hi, that's Kevin. I live here. I like to go to a gym.
Hi, I'm Tricia. I love my life. I got the garbage shop. The high second.
I'm Clayton and I love rugby league. I'm normally kicking the footy around in my backyard. This is my home. This is my life. This is my community.
Hi, my name's Jeremy. My daughter's 3 years old. My daughter's proud that I come to work.
I like to go into work.
Hi, I'm Maddie and I work for the Endeavour Foundation. I come to work with a big smile on my face every day.
Love to work here because that's my new family.